Good morning, Mayhem Makers. We're doing it up a little different today. Now, welcome to week 1 of December Mystery. You get this lovely view of my cutting mat today. We'll see how this works for you. But what's nice with mysteries, if you haven't done them with me before, is week 1 is always just cutting. So this week, I'm just going to show you how I like to cut. And we'll be sending you instructions in an email and in the Facebook group. So keeping it simple, just in case anybody's really new to quilting and joining us for this mystery. This is a super easy one. You're going to knock it out fast, which I love, but I'll give you just my basics in cutting. So we're using fat quarters. Fat quarters normally are about 18 by 20, 22. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I do it with stacking. Because I like to cut about 3 at a time, generally not more than that, because then my squares start to get not quite as clean as I'd like. So I have the fat quarter with the 18-inch side going kind of up and down. I have the long 22-inch side following the bottom of my cutting mat. For this purpose, I have the selvage on my left-hand side. Doesn't really matter, it can be left or right. I'm going to stack my fat quarters, lining them up so that as I go, everything should be nice and straight and consistent. I've ironed these ahead of time. A lot of times I like to use a starch spray to make them nice and crisp. So I just have all 3 stacked on top of each other. Okay, so when I first start cutting, I'm going to start first. I have my nice big 8.5 by 24.5 creative grid. It's one of my favorites because it'll do the full length of this fat quarter. So I'm going to start with that part to clean up my 18-inch side. It doesn't matter which 18-inch side. I'm just going to clean one of them up, making sure I get through all 3 layers. This will give me my straight edge as my baseline for my strips. Okay, so we're just going to cut 3 strips out of each fat quarter. So we'll show you how I do that. I'm then going to take the clean side, turn it towards myself. Okay, so this is kind of my baseline. Sometimes I like to line it up on a line of my mat. It doesn't matter which line, but it just helps make sure that everything stays nice, clean, straight, especially with print. So then what I do is then I'm going to line up the bottom of my ruler on that clean edge, and I'm going to clean up another edge. I'm just making sure I get through all 3 layers because sometimes fat quarters aren't fully consistent. So I want to make sure all 3 layers are nice and straight. So I have a good 90-degree clean lines of my fat quarter. Then I like to rotate again. And it seems weird to keep rotating, but I like to have nice clean lines. And I'm not super skilled at being ambidextrous with my cutting, so rotating is just how it's gonna go. So for your directions with working with fat quarters, we're cutting a 7-inch strip and 2 5-inch strips. That's the plus of having an 8.5-inch ruler, is I can do as wide as 7 and not have to go to like a really big square. So lining up the 7 on the now cleaned up side that I've done of that fat quarter. And then I can just kind of look at the top, make sure it's straight too. And then we're going to cut. Okay, so 7-inch strip. I'm just going to scooch it over here and then do my 5-inch strips. I like to get my big ruler work kind of out of the way, so that I can put it away, and then I switch over to a smaller ruler. So 5-inch and another 5-inch is all we're going to do. And so you have just enough in a fat quarter. This pattern I like because it uses pretty much all the fat quarter. There's no extras. I'm going to move my 2 5-inch ones on top of each other. And I'm going to put them up at the top of my mat. Get them out of my way. Then we'll work with that 7-inch strip and then switch to my, what is this? My 6.5 by 12.5. It's a big go-to for me when I start working with smaller pieces. So what I can start out with is I actually started out with 3.5-inch strips it's going to tell you to do. So you cross cut at 3.5 once, and then twice. And once again, I'm just lining up 3.5 on the straight edge, lining up the bottom edge, making sure I'm not starting to get wonky in my cutting. I just use that ruler on my fabric to make sure everything's turning out nice and clean. And then these 3.5-inch strips, you're just going to cut in half to make 3.5-inch squares. Ta-da! So you're going to have a whole stack of a couple different size squares for this pattern. Now, in the instructions I'm going to send you, there's 2 sets of cutting instructions, so don't get confused. Page 1 is telling you how to work with fat quarters. Page 2 is if you're just using yardage. So if you didn't do a kit and you're just working from fabrics at home that you want to use up, you can use yardage. That's what page 2 is for. But if you're doing fat quarters, just follow page 1. Don't get confused and start moving on to page 2 and cutting up what you've already cut. We don't want that happening. And then I need 2 6.5-inch squares. So I'm actually just going to trim this down, the rest of my strip, to 6.5. So there's an extra 1/2 inch we're just going to take away. Turn it again. Since this is a 6.5-inch wide ruler, it's really nice because now I have that edge on the straight outside. Cut 1 square, scooch it away, and just cut 2. So I'm lining up on the bottom and on the side, and there's your 6.5-inch squares. And then the only thing that's left is the 5-inch strips, and you're just cutting them into 5-inch squares. So I then line up my 5-inch on this clean left side of my strip. So I have the clean side on my left, the rest on my right-hand side. Because I'm right-handed, this is how I work. I always seem to cut kind of left to right, just like how I read. And so you just do this 4 times. So best is lining up. I have the top lined up and I have the 5-inch on the side lined up. If it accidentally twists, it happens, rulers get sketchy and squirrely, you can clean your left side up again and then cut again. So say I went totally crazy, I would then just turn this back around, line up my top straight edge, because you know that's nice and clean, take a little schnibble off. So this is a nice clean 90 degrees again. And then start all over with a 5-inch on the left, straight line on the top, and then keep cutting squares. Because it happens, and you don't want to have wonky squares because it just makes for wonky quilts. Okay, so then we have the second one, just doing the same thing. Cutting 5-inch squares is all we're doing. And that's all you're going to do with all your fat quarters. Not cut your ruler, cut your fabric. But just each fat quarter. So if you're new and you're not used to cutting, do 1 fabric at a time until you're comfortable. Once you're, this is a breeze, you're used to it, or you're just more long-term quilter like me, in the beginning, feel free, stack as high as 3 if you're using a 45mm cutter. You can get fancy and go into like stacks of 6 if you do. I step up to my 60mm if I really want to do a whole bunch at once. Just make sure you're using a bigger rotary cutter to have less shifting issue as you cut. So this is all I have left of my fat quarter. Really nothing usable. So that's what I really enjoy. So you're going to take all your fat quarters, whatever size quilt you're doing. I'm doing throw size, so I had 18, and just start cutting them and have just a pile of squares ready to go for next week. That's all you got to do. Easy peasy cutting. If you have any questions, reach out to me. You can email me, mindy@quiltingmayhem.com. You can call the shop, whatever. I will gladly help you work this out, whatever problems you're having, or just questions in general. Just let me know. Just give me a shout out, and I'll gladly help you. Otherwise, I always love week 1. It's just cutting. See? Fun stuff. So have a great weekend, And we'll see you next week and get ready for sewing. So have a good one. Keep on stitching.